The USA without Texas and the Mexican-American War. Have you ever wondered how one of the most pivotal chapters in American history could have played out differently? What if the United States had never annexed Texas or fought and won the war with Mexico? How would this alternate timeline reshape the history we know today? And what would the United States and even the world look like? Buckle up, history enthusiasts, because we're diving into a fascinating thought experiment to explore the short-term and long-term ripple effects of a scenario where Texas remained independent, or where Mexico retained its northern territories. And don't forget to share your own take on these what-ifs in the comments section below. If you enjoy exploring these alternate scenarios, make sure to like and subscribe for more historical deep dives. The story starts with Texas gaining independence from Mexico in 1836. After breaking away, Texas operated as a republic for nearly a decade. Its annexation by the United States in 1845 was a hotly contested move. Now, imagine if Texas had stayed independent. Without pro-annexation forces succeeding, the entire course of U.S. history might have shifted. Would an independent Texas have become its own powerful nation, allying itself with countries like Britain or France? Or would it have remained fragile, eventually returning to Mexico, or even falling into chaos? Without annexation, there's no spark for the Mexican-American War. Would relations between the US and Mexico have remained peaceful, or would tensions have eventually boiled over regardless? Next, we come to the Mexican-American War, fought between 1846 and 1848. This war was instigated largely over disputes tied to Texas's annexation and boundary claims. The result was a crushing U.S. victory, culminating in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. But what if the war had never happened? Would Mexico have maintained its grip on the northernmost parts of its territory? Could its rich resources, including California's gold, have fueled Mexico's rise as a major power in the Americas? Or, without these resources, would Mexico have remained stagnant, politically divided and vulnerable to other powers? In this alternate reality, the US never gains the southwest or Pacific coast. Would America's identity as a continental and eventually global power be entirely erased? Let's talk short-term effects. Without annexing Texas or winning the war, the US remains smaller, weaker and less unified. Slaveholding interests in the South lose a major foothold. Texas had joined the Union as a slave state, tipping the fragile balance of power in Congress. By removing Texas from the equation, could tensions around slavery have been delayed, or would new flashpoints have emerged elsewhere? Alternatively, would Texas remaining outside the Union lead to other problems for its neighbors? Would the South feel even more isolated and desperate to expand into other territories, pushing them toward conflict anyway? Without the territory gained from Mexico, westward expansion would have been fundamentally limited. The US would likely have struggled to fulfill its manifest destiny, the driving force behind much of its 19th century growth. Would America have looked eastward instead, focusing on dominating trade or expanding influence in the Atlantic? And what about migration patterns? The California gold rush of 1848 wouldn't happen, at least not in the way we know it. Immigrants seeking wealth and opportunity in the American West might have found themselves stuck or searching for alternatives. Could Canada or Alaska have become the new frontier? Now let's consider the big picture, a smaller, weaker version of the United States. Without the key southwestern states, America's economic and political might would shrink dramatically. Forget the transcontinental railroad stretching coast to coast. Without the West, there's no coast to connect. The Southwest is rich in natural resources like oil, gold, and fertile farmland. Without these assets, the US might not have risen to dominate the global economy as it did in the 20th century. Instead, nations like Mexico could have leveraged these resources to gain prominence. Alternatively, Mexico might have faced its own challenges. Holding on to such vast northern territories was already proving difficult for the central government in the mid-19th century. Could Mexico have splintered, allowing new independent nations like a Republic of California to emerge? One of the biggest questions is how this changed reality would affect the Civil War. Would the absence of new territories delay or prevent the South from seceding? Without Texas and the Southwest, the South's dreams of extending slavery into new territories might have been crushed early. On the flip side, losing Texas might have emboldened abolitionist movements in the North, escalating tensions and causing an even earlier spark to ignite civil conflict. The lack of Texas and Southwestern Territory would also drastically weaken the U.S. on the global stage. Without a western coastline, America's ability to engage in Pacific trade or influence global affairs would be significantly reduced. Would Japan still have opened its doors to trade with Commodore Perry's fleet in 1854? Would the U.S. have played a smaller role in major conflicts like World War II if it lacked geopolitical weight? Meanwhile, Mexico, sitting on vast gold mines and oil reserves, might have risen as a contender for dominance in the Americas. Could Mexico have led interventions in Latin America instead of the U.S.? Or could Britain or France have exploited Mexico's instability for their own gain? Finally, let's reimagine the North America of today. What does the map even look like? Could Texas have solidified itself as an independent nation, strengthening regional alliances in North America? Would its oil resources have made it immensely wealthy, fostering rivalries with both Mexico and the U.S.? And what about the blending of cultures? With no Southwest in the Union, American culture might have developed much differently. The U.S., we know, a melting pot of diverse cultures shaped by every corner of the continent, wouldn't exist. Instead, we'd see a far greater Mexican influence in border regions and beyond. As we wrap up, it's clear that without Texas annexation and the Mexican-American War, we'd be living in a radically different world. The U.S. would be smaller, less influential, and far less connected geographically. Mexico's destiny might have transformed entirely, either claiming dominance in the Americas or fracturing under the weight of its vast holdings. But what do you think? Would the U.S. still have risen to greatness in this alternate timeline, or would it have remained a modest power? Would Mexico have fared better or worse by holding on to these lands? Let's open up the debate and hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into alternate history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are endless what-ifs to explore in history, and we can't wait to take you along for the journey. History could have unfolded so differently. Time to speculate together.